So again, this is using Jupyter to empower enterprise analysts. My name is Dave Stuart, and so for the last 15 years, quick introduction, I've worked inside the U.S. intelligence community, where I've worked on multiple efforts to drive enterprise-wide adoption of new technologies, kind of always guided by this principle of rising tide lift all boats, where often one of the biggest ways to have an impact in a large enterprise environment, we're talking tens of thousands of users, is to try to increase the technical proficiency of the largest possible user base. And so for the last 3 years, I've been leading an effort to do exactly that with Jupyter. And so this presentation is about Jupyter's use inside the U.S. intelligence community, knowing that it's the right tool to empower thousands of analysts to apply code to their tradecraft, making that tradecraft more efficient, more shareable, and more repeatable. This talk is also about the technical and human challenges of enterprise-wide adoption of Jupyter, because while our organization is unique in some aspects, the challenges that we have to face by and large, I think, will be relatable to any other enterprise environment looking to adopt Jupyter at scale. And some of the approaches that we've taken hopefully can help inform other enterprises that are looking to adopt Jupyter at scale. So I thought this is kind of a funny way to just kind of start out by describing what analyst work looks like inside the U.S. intelligence community. You have that top row there, which is a more kind of pop culture depiction of what it is people think analysts do in the IC. But that bottom row is a much more relatable and a far more realistic view of what our analysts look like, because they're essentially data analysts in an enterprise environment, and they will look no different than, I think, with a financial analyst or insurance analyst, but for us we call them Intel analysts or IAs. And so in particular, doing analysis in a large enterprise environment means we have this massive analytic user base, again, over 10,000 users. And the traditional model of having analysts kind of write requirements and having capabilities, try to have developers try to create solutions for those users is just impractical. It doesn't address the speed and scale of this mission. And so in many cases, we also need these kind of fine-grained, sometimes ephemeral analytic solutions that only affect a small number of users for a very short period of time. And so again, pairing analysts to developers at this scale, the scale of our enterprise, doesn't work. So what that means in real terms is that when analysts are presented with a new problem, they go back to a way of a manual workflow that requires them to use many different tools, pieced together in a manual fashion where they ultimately dump that data to Excel and do that final analysis in Excel. But these kinds of solutions are hard to capture, they're hard to share, and they're hard to reproduce. And equally important, they are an inefficient use of kind of the analyst's time and their skill sets. And so this is a quote here from an analyst who's one of our biggest advocates in the Jupyter community internally. And just kind of a funny anecdote, when she was first shown Jupyter about 2 years ago, her initial reaction was, quote, "No analyst will ever use this." And she has since done a full 180, and now she's one of our strongest advocates in that community. And you'll see me quote from this a number of times throughout the presentation, where this is a blog post that she wrote kind of describing her journey as initially a Jupyter skeptic and now really a passionate kind of Jupyter advocate. But at the start of this blog post, she's talking about how looking at her workflow, she's recognizing how much of that is manual, kind of menial tasks that are really taking away from her core job of doing the analysis that she wants to be doing. And so we believe Jupyter is a solution to that problem, because in particular at the highest level, what Jupyter has enabled us to do is go beyond developers writing scripts to analysts writing reproducible workflows. We've always had developers in the community that have had the ability to write scripts, but again, at enterprise scale, it's hard to pair them with analysts to always answer every question an analyst has at every time they have those questions. So we want analysts to be able to do a lot of that work themselves, and Jupyter has been really the catalyst that's enabled these analysts to do this themselves. That's for a number of reasons. One, being web-based, it makes it far more approachable to this community that most likely will not have had any kind of command line development experience before. And the notebook format really lends itself, obviously, to this reproducible workflow where it's enabling analysts to document their tradecraft, their code and documentation all in one place in a portable document that they can share throughout the community for others to reproduce and benefit from their work. And so further on in that blog post, again from the same analyst, she's talking about now, after using Jupyter, instead of thinking of her workflow largely in terms of tools, she's thinking in terms of questions and data, which is exactly the level that we want these analysts operating on. We don't want them kind of bogged down with the menial manual tasks of knowing how, which tool to use and how to use it. We want them ultimately to be asking questions of the data to, again, try to help them derive insight from that data for our purposes. Another huge benefit we get from using Jupyter, and this is Brian Granger talked about this a lot in his initial talk today in this track, is we benefit from this massive open source ecosystem. And this is really beneficial from an enterprise level because while our data and how we might collect that data may be unique, the types of analysis that we're trying to do overwhelmingly are shared across any other kind of data environment. And so where there are solutions, and obviously the Python ecosystem for doing data science, data analysis, data visualization is a very strong, robust ecosystem. Where we can benefit from that makes us far more efficient use of our resources, and we're not having to kind of recreate and try to create these solutions on our own. So our goals for Jupyter are, first, we want to make analyst workflows more efficient. We want to enable them to capture their analytic knowledge to share them with others. And we want to reach analysts at their level. Because while learning code for some analysts is okay, expecting them to be a sysadmin is not. Right? And expecting them to be able to install and configure these complex environments is really outside of the scope of what we're trying to do for these analysts. And also to use Jupyter enterprise scale. So in Paco's keynote this morning, I talked about some of the challenges that every enterprise will have to face in doing that, and our enterprise certainly is no different. So in particular, I'll talk about these 4 challenges, right? The challenges of adopting it to our user base. Yes, group?
What is enterprise scale at the DoD?
Tens of thousands, right?
That are using it now?
No, not now, but like that I would hope would be using it.
Just curious where you're at.
Yeah, we're in the 5 to 10,000 range now. So for one is adopting it to our user base. 2 is enabling this user base to collaborate kind of efficiently, effectively across this large organization. 3rd is addressing issues related to data security, and in our instance, obviously those can be pretty extreme. And then finally is addressing issues related to compliance. So on the user base side, the primary analytic user base we're trying to adapt this to are mostly non-coders. I originally had in there non-technical, but that's not exactly accurate because they are technical analysts. They are dealing with data day in, day out for their job. But the kind of common characteristic that a lot of them have is that they weren't hired in because they were computer scientists or they're data scientists. They were hired in for their domain knowledge. And they most likely will not have had previous experience kind of doing command line development before. But again, as I mentioned there, these are our domain knowledge experts. They're the ones with tasked with driving insight from their data. They're the ones who understand their data better than anybody else. And so we think there's a huge untapped coding potential in this workforce. On the collaboration challenge side, with this large geographically dispersed user base, where as much as possible we want to enable these to maximize discovery and collaboration opportunities across the variety of analysts at the variety of locations for our users. On the data security side, again, this is not a unique challenge in an organization, but for us it can be pretty extreme. We're dealing with very sensitive subject matter. Certainly in the intelligence community here, it's not an exaggeration to saying we're dealing with some of the highest levels of classified data that the government has. And so because of that, we have extreme fine-grained data security rules that's generally governed by this need-to-know principle, meaning that simply being in the community, simply having a top-secret clearance doesn't automatically give you access to all this data. Data is very kind of compartmentalized and restricted to this need-to-know principle of only those who have a kind of a mission need to know to access that data can get access to that data. And so as it relates to Jupyter Notebooks, what that means is the input data of a notebook can vary greatly based on time and user. And so one user who runs a notebook may have different access and authorities than another user, even though they're within our community, even though they have the same kind of level of classification access. On the compliance side, also goes along with some of the sensitivity aspects of that data. We need to make sure that where we are processing this type of data meets our internal compliance for system accreditation. We also need to make sure we're adhering to all of our legal and policy obligations with things like retention and oversight for that data. So our approach here, on the execution environment, we supply a pre-built Jupyter container to try to create a unified execution environment across this large user base to enable them to collaborate easier so they're operating in the same environment. The infrastructure from which we run that environment is a ephemeral personalized VM environment where the ephemeral and short-term nature really helps us address some of those corporate compliance policies, and the personalized nature really helps us address the data security policy by ensuring that only that one user that may have unique authorizations, unique accesses to see data is allowed in the environment from which they can see the notebook results. And as an aside, this ephemeral, literally self-destructing environment actually places an even more emphasis on the reproducibility of a workflow. Because every time you may do something new, you could have a completely clean environment. And so, Jupyter Notebooks really lends itself to that use case, and the pairing of these two have been very kind of successful for us. And so what this does is it creates what we call a micro data science environment, which is really perfect for that individual. It gives them a place that is authorized and accredited to handle some very sensitive data, to perform their analysis, but it overlooks this larger community. Because we'll have hundreds of unique users kind of operating on these independent islands of data science that by design aren't configured to easily collaborate and share with each other. So to overcome that, our team has developed nbgallery, or Notebook Gallery, as an enterprise Jupyter notebook and sharing collaboration platform. I note there it's only for the code. Because of the sensitivity of the data, we don't want, and we can't allow a user who's run a notebook to share the notebook with the results to other users who may not have the same levels of authorities and accesses that they may have. We've open source released that because not just being kind of a beneficiary of open source, we wanted to contribute back if and where we do have unique approaches that could be beneficial to the larger community. And what nbgallery gives us is this kind of easy to use repository of community authored notebooks. Often within an enterprise, when you're looking at how to share and collaborate on notebooks, you look at something like an enterprise GitHub or GitLab server. But as that comment kind of depicts, Git as a tool, even for those with strong data science or strong computer science backgrounds, can still be troublesome at times. And so trying to get that used by this analyst community that most likely have never done any command line development before, we thought could potentially put some of these collaboration options out of reach for that community. So this is what nbgallery looks like, just a web-based repository of our notebooks. You can go in there and search for a notebook. When you find one, you're now just viewing a rendering of that notebook because it's only the code. It's not any of the input data or output results. If you want to run that notebook, now we need to tie together these decoupled environments. So you have nbgallery there on the left, which is, again, only allowing the sharing of the code of the notebooks. You click the little Run in Jupyter banner. If you were an analyst, it would launch it over to that Jupyter execution environment. Now you're in a place where you actually, again, that personalized ephemeral VM environment where you can run that notebook, get access to the data that, again, you may uniquely be authorized to see, analyze the results. If you write a new notebook or edit an existing notebook or want to submit a change request for somebody else, we added a Jupyter extension in there. So again, you're not doing it through the command line. You can do it through little web options. And before that notebook leaves that environment, we automatically strip out the results so that, again, we're not inadvertently sharing data to others who may not have the same level of authorities and accesses. So that helps address some of these kind of compliance and data security challenges. I'll spend the most part of this talk talking about what we're doing on the collaboration and user-based side, because that's been a big area of focus for us. And in particular, collaborating at enterprise scale, from our experience working on some other platforms, we recognize that one of the side effects of crowdsourcing analytic solutions across a large enterprise is you can end up with a high volume of solutions as well as potentially redundant solutions, where through no fault of their own, users in different locations or different offices are trying to answer the same question and not realizing that they're both working on it, and so they end up creating just more solutions than are actually needed for that problem. So we try to address this in two ways. We have an effort focused on recommender analytics to help analysts easily discover notebooks that are relevant to them, authored from within the community. And we have another effort really focused on notebook health that tries to provide insight to the user of whether that notebook is still functioning and is still can be expected to run in its current environment. So I'll talk a little bit of detail about both of these. On the recommender side, this is not a unique approach to that problem. Obviously, there's many great companies out there built around recommending products, services, and movies to people. We just want to do the same thing with notebooks. So we've written a series of analytics that kind of fall into these three categories. So we look at notebook usage, things like the trendiness of that notebook, and notebook health, which I'll talk in more detail about in a little bit. We have a series of non-personalized recommendations, things like content similarity and user also viewed that we measure. And then we have a series of personalized recommendations where we look for similar users to that active user within our enterprise environment. Where we have organizational information and our organizations kind of lend themselves to a hierarchical organizational structure, we can recommend notebooks based on being in an organization or a parent or child or sister type organization. We also hard code notebooks that we think are beneficial for new users as a recommender. So if we recognize that you're new to the platform, things like intro to Jupyter, intro to Python will probably come up in your recommended feed. And we have a white paper that we published if you want to kind of read more detail. That goes into the paper goes into much more technical detail, obviously, about what we're doing in that regard. But how the results of these recommender analytics are displayed to the users is you come to the homepage, and on the left, that's a little snippet of what the homepage looks like. You get kind of the aggregate results of these analytics. So you're seeing notebooks that are recommended, based on your previous interactions, your interest, and potentially your role in the organization. Right there on the homepage. And then every time you view a notebook, we give you the kind of sliding bars of recommenders based on content similarity of notebooks and that kind of user also viewed view of the of recommenders. On the notebook health side, this was another big priority for us because the challenge here is that users who discover and run broken notebooks will tend to think that they did something wrong or the system doesn't work, and they'll lose confidence in one or the other or both, which is an outcome we want to avoid, particularly when we're trying to adopt this to a user base that is new to this type of kind of technical development. And so how do we define notebook health? Well, we're saying notebook health is the expectation that a notebook runs in its current environment. Our use case, because of the sensitivity of data and the fine-grained data security rules that we have, doesn't lend itself to kind of automated tests. So we had to define a system to kind of passively monitor the performance of a notebook and infer whether or not we think that notebook is healthy. We use the results of this notebook health, I mentioned earlier, on our recommenders because as much as possible, we want to put notebooks in front of users that we believe are healthy and then not lead them down a path of finding notebooks that we have kind of inferences, at least, that it's not currently functioning. All right, so how do we measure notebook health? What do we mean by notebook health here? Well, first and foremost, a notebook is only healthy if the individual code cells that make up that notebook is healthy. And so we measure that by recording the execution status of every cell of every notebook within that ephemeral VM compute environment. Because of the data sensitivity concerns that we have, we can't get a lot of granularity out of the execution, so we're just measuring did that notebook throw an exception. There's a talk earlier today where they talked about tapping into 0MQ to get much more detailed information about the execution status of each cell, but again, with our use case, we can't do that. So we're just looking at whether or not through an exception, which is a bit of a coarse look, but it's enough for us to kind of make some inferences of whether or not we think that's healthy. We look for things of like how far the user makes it into that notebook, because generally speaking, notebook's meant to be run kind of linearly from top to bottom, so that the more cells a user is executing the notebook, the more likely it is that they think that notebook's healthy and they're happy with its progress and its results. We also look to see how many unique users and how many number of times a user has run that notebook. Again, because of that data sensitivity challenge they keep coming back to, a notebook that works for one user may not work for a different user who has different levels of accesses, different authorities. And so the more unique people we see running a notebook, the more confidence we gain that that notebook is kind of healthy in a general sense as opposed to just working for that one user and its kind of unique sets of authorities. And then lastly, we looked at how recently that notebook was executed because we operate in a dynamic enterprise IT environment where APIs might change, data formats might change, and other things might change. So the more recent we've seen a notebook successfully executed, the more confident we are, and the longer it's been, the less confident we are. So in practice, that's a 30-day window where we automatically decay the health of a notebook if we're not seeing it actively used over that 30-day period. And just like the recommenders, we got a white paper on this if you want to go see more detail on it. It's probably, again, much more technical detail about what we're doing there. And then how is this presented to the user? So every time you discover a notebook in nbgallery, we put a little health icon there. You can see it right here. It's kind of green. Green is healthy, red is unhealthy, gray is unknown. So it gets quick indication of whether or not we think that notebook's healthy, in addition to kind of factoring into the recommenders analytics. And if you were to click that icon, then you get a detailed breakdown of the execution status of that notebook over the last 30 days, where this graph is showing you a kind of a cell-by-cell breakdown of all the executions we've observed for that notebook. And some of the challenges we have, given the diverse use case that we see for notebooks, is that we need to take into account notebooks that might have intentionally failing cells because they're part of an education class that is meant to show you an exception. We have taken into account notebooks that have optional cells, maybe kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure type notebook, where depending on who's running it, they may want to output it in different formats or going to view it in different ways. And we have to take into account notebooks that have external dependencies, which, again, in a dynamic enterprise IT environment might have infrequent outages that will kind of show up in these execution status. So we actually calculate almost a dozen, I think, unique health metrics which aggregate together for that overall health metric. And again, those are described in much more detail in that white paper if you want to see more information about it. All right, so next I'll talk about how we're adapting this to this user base through kind of efforts around kind of Python-based training and outreach to get more users writing Python Jupyter notebooks. And at a high level, we need to find a balance between the needs for training and this kind of demanding workload of our user base, where it's and sometimes can't be expected that we can have them take days-long or week-long classes to try to learn some of these things because it takes them away from what they're really supposed to be doing as part of their real workload. Another thing to kind of take into account is that success in this case doesn't mean that we're necessarily creating a new kind of computer scientist or a new data scientist. Rather, an analyst who can learn and use some code may still have kind of tangible benefits and may still be helpful for our mission. And this is kind of reflected in these quotes, again, from that same blog post from that analyst I talked about at the beginning. What she mentions here, learning to code is not a career shift, but rather a means to better think about how to tackle her workflow. And she also kind of commented that initially when she was approached with this idea of like, we want to try to learn Python to kind of help you write your own notebooks, she was afraid that it'd be too big of a time commitment to learn enough Python to be beneficial. But as she's talking about here, she admitted that she was wrong about that. And just even using some basic coding concepts and basic coding skills has helped her write notebooks that are having a tangible impact and help make her workflow more efficient and more repeatable. And so particularly for us, we've created this very lightweight course called Intro to Python for Analysis, where its goal is to kind of demystify coding concepts for these non-traditional coders. We think it addresses kind of a gap in some of the offerings where, in many cases, classes that we already have this kind of by developer, for developer mentality, or they kind of jump right into some of the more kind of advanced data science topics where in many cases, again, kind of teaching them some initial basics can help them get started kind of improving their workflow. We do it all through Jupyter notebooks, obviously, that are hosted in nbgallery, kind of this flipped classroom model, where analysts can kind of do these kind of bite-sized chunks of learning, alongside their regular kind of business tasks that they have to be working on. And we supplement that with kind of virtual and in-person mentoring sessions that we offer throughout our enterprise environment. So if you want help on exercises, if you want to kind of ask questions or you're struggling with something, we have an always maintained virtual presence as well as a in-person presence at a variety of locations that you can come in and talk with the mentor to kind of help resolve some of those problems. And this has always been benefited from this grassroots kind of community level support. We don't have really any kind of official resources for this. We just have a vast network of volunteers within our enterprise because what we found and what I imagine a lot of enterprises will have is there are plenty of people who are passionate about Python or are passionate about data science that are more than willing to help other users within their enterprise kind of improve their workflows and gain efficiencies. And so we've been able to kind of tap in, given the size of our organization, there's a number of people out there that we've been able to benefit from their help. As a little aside, to kind of support this use case of this on-demand self-paced training, we created a little Jupyter extension called Ordo, which provides kind of feedback to the user while you're running a notebook of whether or not you got an exercise right, if it is a kind of deterministic exercise. Fun fact about that, we had a West Point cadet who worked for us over the summer create it, and he is now graduated and he is a officer in the Army in an infantry unit, but he created that capability for us last summer, which is pretty cool. Another thing we did to adopt this to our user base is we provide metrics to these users that they can use to kind of help gain confidence and help reinforce the value and the contributions they're having within our community. And so these are metrics that show things like the number of unique users that have run their notebooks within our environment. And this quote here, this is actually from a different user, so this is not the same blog post I've quoted a number of times already. But they're saying, this may seem like a little thing on its face, and I certainly can understand if you're looking at that and saying this seems small, but within an enterprise environment, these metrics really do help users, again, gain value and gain understanding of how their contributions are contributing to others across the environment. And so much so that we put the stop-start time in there to enable users for like performance review season to go in there and kind of pick the metrics to say, during this 6-month, 12-month period, I've written X number of notebooks that have benefited Y number of users across Z number of organizations, right? Showing that they're having a bigger impact than just locally in their office and they're a part of this larger community of people who are writing these analytics and submitting these analytics. I can wait to the end. I can take it now. Yeah.
So do you see the feedback loop between the incentives to learning Python and giving people metrics? Like, I would see that as somebody who wasn't set to learn Python, and they do a little bit, and then their notebook suddenly takes off, like, oh, that Python wasn't so hard, and I got a lot of traction because I used it, or are you not seeing a feedback loop?
Oh, no, I'm seeing a feedback loop as kind of encouraging them to be an active contributor, maintainer, so to speak, of some of these notebooks, and just, and again, kind of recognizing that they can have some impact beyond like the one office they're in, right? And potentially, this can fuel like more collaboration options because they can recognize, oh, there are people out there in this universe that are using my same notebook, right? All right, so we'll talk about results and use here. Current status, kind of mentioned before, right? Thousands of users of Jupyter Notebooks within our environment. They have authored thousands of notebooks and about only in the hundreds of authors. And there's actually this 10-to-1 ratio of notebook users to authors. And that happens because of that data sensitivity, where we need users to run notebooks under their own kind of persona, under their own accreditations and accesses, because they may get different results than the author might have gotten, because they may, again, have unique accesses and authorities. These graphs.
What is the GFE node, the GFE kind of thing, government certified one? The pieces that they were using? Or?
I don't know if I know what GFE is, sorry.
Like I'm working with VA, Veterans Affairs, they have a,
Oh,
they supply us the laptop so that we cannot download anything, we cannot.
yeah, so I mean, this is all within the intelligence community, so this is all on our classified networks and probably not, like, it's certainly accessible. Like, the data obviously is not accessible to be downloaded or anything else. All right, so the bottom there, the graphs are just showing the kind of rate of adoption we've had over the last 3 years. So on the left there, you're seeing the total number of cumulative notebooks we've written and authored within our community. On the right, you're seeing the total number of unique users per month. And what's interesting to note is you may have seen this tweet, kind of Peter Parente put this out there, of the 2.6 million notebooks that are currently publicly available on GitHub, and that goes longer than the last 3 years, but I think it's the last 3.5 or almost 4 years. But it was interesting to note for us that those graphs kind of are somewhat similar as far as the rate of adoption. And being inside of a large bureaucratic organization inside government, right, we're not always the quickest adopters of new technology. And so to have that be even close to being similar, I think is pretty awesome on our part. So on the use cases side, we have these 3 high-level use cases, right? Kind of the, bearing the lead here at the end. Like, this is what we're actually using Jupyter Notebooks for. This operational use case, this course material use case, and this building block use case. On the operational side, because of the sensitivities obviously about some of the work here, I can't go into too much detail how to redact the whole notebook here. But they kind of share 3 high-level categories, right, or 3 high-level aspects. They support a particular business mission function, again, helping that analyst drive insight from their data. They'll use data from corporate repositories that they access over APIs, which in most cases, almost all cases, prompts the users for query input. So we have this kind of flip model of interaction with notebooks where all of our analysts are generally interacting in the notebook at the very beginning of it, as opposed to kind of interacting at the end, or in addition to, sorry, interacting at the end with widgets to kind of look at the visualizations. And so we're heavy users of IPy widgets to create kind of user-friendly forms to query a notebook, because we'll have required query parameters that the user will need to enter in order to run that notebook. All right, second use case here is course material. I mean, there's a whole track, obviously, on the benefits of Jupyter within education. Certainly within an enterprise, right, we benefit from the notebook format as a means for teaching coding. But and we teach formal Intro to Python classes. I mentioned that Intro to Python for Analysis class taught through Jupyter Notebooks. But the other major benefit we get at the enterprise level from teaching in Jupyter Notebooks is that it's the exact same platform that users can apply that knowledge for kind of business or operational purposes, right? So we really kind of reduce the barriers between the learned and applied, because they come into a class, they're learning in that same platform, they can immediately go and apply that to their use case and their daily analysis. And then thirdly here, this use case that has grown organically really over the last 3 years, we call building blocks. And it's where our users are finding a lot of value in sharing reproducible code snippets for others within the community. So these notebooks may not, almost in all cases, don't touch any of our kind of corporate data for the purposes of actually doing analysis. They're not part of formal training series, but they're just sharing, here's how to use this library, here's how to create this visualization, here's how to do something, which could be even as fun as this little ASCII art generator, which, as an aside, is the first notebook I show new analysts, because it provides kind of immediate gratification that you run some code and something happens, you see some output from it, and it's broadly applicable to everybody, right? It's not kind of restricted to a use case or something like that. Yes?
Is there any grouping, curation, or review for these style of notebooks, or do they overlap and you have conflicting?
Yeah, so on the curation side, that's something we're actively working right now. So we're treating it as another recommender problem, where we look at the user base and say, for this given notebook, what other author in our community will be maybe best suited to do that. And so that's part of looking at shared library use and shared even user base of similar organizations, similar mission functions. But it's also the result of an author contribution score metric that we calculate. So you can't really see it here, but there's a little icon next to the redacted person's name. This one here is gold, I think. So they're in the top 10 percentile of authors, right? And so that gets boosted for that recommenders as a way to potentially say these are the potential best suitors for reviewing a notebook. So we're working on it, because that obviously is a challenge with the scale of this, but don't have it fully out there yet. All right, so and one thing we did is actually try to analyze what's the breakdown of the number of notebooks we see within these 3 use cases. And what's kind of interesting about this is it's almost 50-50, right? Half the notebooks that our users are writing are meant for that kind of operational use case to help them do their analysis. The other half is supporting the education use case of helping them better do the analysis. So the combination of the formal course materials or these informal building blocks that ultimately are meant to support that operational use case. All right, so lastly, because I think I'm almost out of time here, I'll talk about the one future effort we have in looking at how to use Jupyter. And that is kind of mirroring this use case for using Jupyter for reporting and dissemination. All right, so you heard about it obviously this morning, the awesome presentation from the guy who works at LIGO. And there was this article in the Atlantic and the Paul Romer blog post talking about the impact that Jupyter is having within the scientific publication market. There's also now some really exciting use, obviously we saw from the keynote from the guy from Columbia, but there's the use now with Jupyter within journalism. So there's this LA Times article from like a month or 2 ago to use Jupyter to kind of, again, provide tradecraft transparency and how you're reporting out data. Well, the IC has that same problem, right? Where you have these individual intelligence agencies that have unique authorities and unique data, and their analysts, the job of them is to obviously analyze that data and report out the results for other members of the IC, as well as these all-source analysts who are trying to kind of finally kind of piece together all this information into one view of it. And we think Jupyter could potentially have a similar impact where it would enable us to provide more kind of tradecraft transparency into that analysis, especially as that analysis is becoming more data and computationally intensive. And so we're looking at this use case that's developing. It's already developed externally for using Jupyter for that, and we're now thinking we could potentially do something similar. But we'll have all the same challenges of data access and collaboration and compliance and all those other things. So there's a lot left to be done on that, but we've started thinking about that, which is kind of exciting, I think. And so with that, I think I'm almost out of time. Can I take any questions? Or I can take questions. All right. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Yes.
I'm wondering when you have the building block notebooks,
Yep.
is there some kind of best practice that you have to transfer that into a package at some point?
Yeah.
System of metrics that you provide.
Yeah, no, so that's a great, that's a great question. And that's an active challenge of this, this large community. It's almost a herding cat problem at some level, right? But I just got back from the Netflix paper mill talk about using parameterized notebooks, and one of the great slides that all of us from our team who was watching that kind of almost wanted to applaud was notebooks aren't libraries, right? And so we have that challenge of at what point do you say this notebook that people are either trying to run as a parameterized fashion or they're running it by just copy and pasting the code, like when should that be a library? And yeah, we don't have like strict guidelines for that yet. It's kind of a community effort, but like more work I think is done there because that's becoming a challenge with the scale of this, right? So we need to think about it a little bit more.
Have you seen the analysts start dropping the use of Excel?
Anecdotally, yes. I can't say that. Yeah, I don't have any metrics on it, right? But yeah, I mean, like obviously the point of this is to, Excel-based workflows are hard to reproduce and hard to share and hard to collaborate on, and so moving to this is certainly helpful. In the back there, yeah.
Yeah, from a user to creator ratio, say 10 to 1.
Yep.
Are the authors the ones? I guess I'm just trying to see someone who creates the majority of the notebook versus someone who take it and change it, change the input file name or a couple of input
Yep.
parameters. How do you distinguish officially an author, like majority of the creation versus, I hate to use the term certificated, if you know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, so I mean, every user of a notebook, those operational notebooks, they can't be run without providing some kind of input, right? Because they will require a query, they'll require mandated, input field. So a user will have to interact with it at some level, right? Heavily using widgets in our case, so we're not having them, change the code and kind of change the cells. So we do that part of it there. But that 10 to 1 ratio, I think I forgot to mention was, it's a great way to introduce Jupyter to new analysts and kind of to sell them on this concept of, it has a tangible impact on their workflow. They now start to make some connections between, blocks or cells of code and tangible functions, like this cell got my data from this repository, this cell transformed it, this cell made a visualization. And so most likely before they ever start taking or ever get that curiosity to start learning Python and write their own notebooks, they're already a semi-proficient user of notebooks on their own. So we see it as a great kind of like glide path and kind of getting more people in that community interested to author their own by using other people's notebooks initially.
Of course, the inputs are generally forms instead of people.
Yes, yeah, 100%, yeah. Yep.
How do you launch the notebooks for the non-technical people? Like, do you have them open up a terminal?
Oh, yeah.
An instance of a server?
Nope, so again, you click that, just the run in Jupyter banner. I think I blew by it here a second. So you just click that little banner. It launches it up automatically in Jupyter. We've even done, we use Jupyter dashboards, and so some of these notebooks that really lend themselves to that kind of almost like a web form-like look, we will automatically convert it to Jupyter dashboards and then just present the widget-based view of it to make it even more user-friendly to users. But yeah, again, the user will never have to touch the command line unless they want to, and we can try to address that approachability, get it at their level.
I got one more question.
Yep.
Do you use like a Unix file system? Like what kind of file systems do you use for like your analysts?
For
Just for like your data structures and stuff like that.
I mean, they're all for all these data. They're calling them over corporate APIs, and they're stored in other type repositories. So it's all done over an API level from the notebook.
Rough ballpark, how much staff do you have supporting this? What I'm trying to get in is like, how much effort, because it sounds like you have a great system going.
Yep.
You're developing a whole bunch of cool features, but I'm trying to get a size of, how realistic is this for what size of, like how many people do you need to build and support something?
Yeah, so I mean, for the staff, I mean, you really could count it on one hand that are actively working on this, but the caveat is the infrastructure piece was provided for us, right? So that is the hard part of this, right?
But like writing the metrics and all that stuff, that's handled by your team?
Yeah, there's essentially one guy that's done all this. Yeah. He's in the audience or somewhere, but yeah, so yeah. But again, I mean, like the bigger challenge is how to build that infrastructure that can support all these users and that ephemeral compute environment. We didn't have to do that, right? That's what's enabled us as a very, very small team to get this so widely used.
Do you find Jupyter useful for more machine learning workflows, specifically things that eventually are supposed to go to production?
So in almost all of these use cases, yeah, so certainly people are using it for machine learning and using it for kind of what, classically people would call it like data science. A lot of this use case, though, is still, reproducible workflows that could be thought of as, automating workflows and that level, right? So not what is traditionally would be data science. Like there's not a lot of, there is machine learning and statistical analysis type going on, but the bulk of this workflow is a citizen data science use case where it's reproducible workflows and some workflow automation type tasks. That's it.
Let's thank our speaker again.
Thanks.